Welcome to the March meeting of the Florida PowerShell User Group. My name is Mike Robbins, and our presentation this month is on PowerShell Fundamentals for Beginners. I've got a few PowerPoint slides. We'll spend most of our time doing demo. We'll talk about our sponsors again briefly, and then I'll provide contact information. And as David was saying, if you have a question, just type it into the chat, or feel free to unmute because we've got a limited number of people in here, and I'd like to keep this interactive. So just feel free to interrupt me because I'd rather, if you have a question, I'd rather cover it right then and there than maybe having to backtrack for a while. Okay, so this is a beginner level session, and I know some of us in the chat room or viewing this presentation are not necessarily beginners, but hopefully everybody here will get something out of this. So what is PowerShell? And really, what is this thing called PowerShell? What can it do for me, and why should I care? That's what most people say. Well, I added a screenshot from Microsoft to give you the official definition. Windows PowerShell is a task-based command line shell and scripting language designed especially for system administration. And I crossed out language there because, to me, if it's designed especially for system administration, who does system administration? System administrators. And if you start telling system administrators that they're going to be working with a scripting language, it sounds like a programming language, and it scares them off. So what I want to do is give you my definition. So my definition is very similar to Microsoft's. It's PowerShell is an easy-to-use command line shell and scripting interface or environment for automating administrative tasks of Windows-based systems. So I've taken the language out of my definition that would potentially scare off system administrators, because that's my job also. That's what I do. So I've got a few additional things here to add. Ultimately, PowerShell is a means to an end. To me, it's not a technology in itself. It's not Exchange. It's not SharePoint. The end user, for the most part, doesn't see PowerShell. Now, with like Sapient Technologies PowerShell Studio 2012, you can write GUIs on top of your PowerShell. And then you could provide that to an end user who would be using a GUI and using PowerShell under the covers and never even know it. Okay, so if you're not actively trying to learn PowerShell today, then you're soon going to be well behind the learning curve of the average IT pro. But I'm assuming that's why you're here, and I'm glad you're here. And the other thing about PowerShell is, who likes free tools? I mean, PowerShell is free with Windows. So, normally you don't have an issue getting approval from management to use PowerShell. Usually, if you have an issue getting it approved, it's with the security team, because management, they're all for it. Hey, it's going to make you more efficient. It's free. We already own it because we own Windows. Okay, so I want to give you some background information. PowerShell commands are called commandlets. And commandlet is pronounced commandlet, not CMD-let. I've heard CMD-let, and that just drives me crazy. Commandlets are in the form of singular verb-noun commands. So it's going to be get service, not get services. And it'll be get dash service, and the dash is silent when you're saying that. You say get service or get process. And some of that's personal preference, but it's also what I've heard in the industry of other people do. So now let's talk about the different versions of PowerShell. So PowerShell 1.0 was installed but not enabled on Windows Vista and Server 2008. PowerShell 2 is installed by default on Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2. So I have a lot of people ask me, okay, how do I get started with this PowerShell thing? I've got Windows 7 or I've got Windows 8, and where do I go download it? And it's like, hey, you've already got it. And the PowerShell ISE is installed by default on Windows 7. And the ISE, I had somebody ask me, okay, what's that acronym? What's ISE? It's the Integrated Scripting Environment. And PowerShell version 2.0 can be installed on Windows XP and Server 2003 or higher. And if you do have, even if you have PowerShell 1.0 on your Vista or Server 2008, I would highly recommend to go ahead and load on Vista. The newest one you can load is PowerShell 2.0. But on Server 2008, as long as you've got the latest service pack, you can actually load PowerShell 3.0. And you just want to make sure there's certain things that you could be running on that machine, such as SharePoint, that PowerShell 3.0 could break. But there's no shipping product today, if it's got the latest service pack, that PowerShell 2.0 will break. Now, you also want to check with your third-party vendors, because normally if a third-party vendor tells you not to load PowerShell version 2.0, it's because they don't want the newer version of the .NET framework on the box for because of their software. So PowerShell 3.0. It's installed by default on Windows 8 and Server 2012. The ISE is installed by default on Windows 8 and Server 2012 if you installed the full GUI. And the default installation on Server 2012, if you put the CD in and say next, 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 you get Server Core, which is no GUI. But in Server 2012, the GUI can be turned off and on, just like, well, actually, which is the opposite of 2008. In 2008, if you install Server Core, you're stuck with it. You got to reload. But in 2012, you do not have to do that. And I wrote a blog a while back. If you go out and do an Add Windows feature, and you attempt to add the ISE to the Server Core on Server 2012, it'll actually it will let you. But what you end up with is it adds the GUI to your server and puts the ISE on there for you. So anyway, to continue on here, PowerShell 3.0 can be installed on Windows 7 and Server 2008 or higher, which I kind of find odd because Server 2008 non-R2 is what I consider to be the Vista version of Server. And then PowerShell remoting is enabled by default on Server 2012. And that really, PowerShell remoting it adds a lot of functionality to your environment, because even if a commandlet has a computer name parameter, and if I have the option to use PowerShell remoting, that's the option that I would choose. Okay, so how do I start PowerShell? On Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2 and prior OSs, you go to Start, All Programs, Accessories, Windows PowerShell. And this is kind of what it looks like. I've trimmed a few things out of the Start menu, but most people are familiar with those OSs, if you're an IT person, that you can find this. And you'll notice this screenshot is from a 64-bit operating system. And the way I can tell that is I've got 4 shortcuts. I've got 2 that say x86, which are the 32-bit versions, and I've got 2 that do not have a version, which means those are the 64-bit versions. Unless you run into a problem, use the 64-bit shortcuts. Now, there are certain modules and snap-ins that may not work with the 64-bit versions, but try it first, and if you have a problem and you think it might be a 64-bit related issue, then go back and try the 32-bit versions. I have personally never run into an issue where I had to run the x86 versions, but I know of people who have. On Windows 8 and Server 2012, it's a little bit different because you've got Metro. You got the Metro interface, and it's accessed from the All Applications page. And we'll be demonstrating that, because the machines we're going to demonstrate on, the primary machine runs Windows 8 and of course has PowerShell version 3 installed. So one of the most common things I hear from people who are new to PowerShell is, how do I figure out what the commands are? So what we're going to do during this presentation is learn to investigate and explore PowerShell. I'm not going to give you a fish. I'm not just going to tell you the commands. I'm going to teach you to fish. I'm going to teach you to figure out the commands for yourself. And when you don't know how to do something, what do? And it's not Google it. I know that's the common answer here for most things, but that's not the answer here. You ask for help, and that's exactly what you do in PowerShell. So the core commands for discovering how to use PowerShell, the first one is get help. And there's 3 things in red on this slide, and if you will, write those things down, because if you don't get anything else out of this presentation, if you'll remember those 3 things, then you can figure everything else out for yourself. So get help, the way I use it, I use get help to figure out how to use commands. Now you can use it for discovering commands, but that's not what I use it for. Get command is the command that I use to discover commands. So it's used to find what commands are available. And once I find those commands with get command, then I use get help to figure out how to use those commands. And then of course you have get member. And get member will help you discover what objects, properties, and methods. It'll help you discover what type of object is produced by a commandlet. It'll also help you determine what properties and methods are available for those, what is returned as far as properties, and what action, a method is an action you can take. And we'll be demonstrating this. So something else, when you run PowerShell, it's preferable that you run it as an administrator, because if you don't and you try to do something like stop a service, you're going to get a cryptic error message, because PowerShell does not have the ability to participate in UAC or user access control. So it just gives you a cryptic error message instead of prompting you like a GUI application would to say, hey, do you want to do this? And at this point here, we're going to jump out to PowerShell. So what I've got is a virtual machine that's running Windows 8. And I actually just reverted this machine. And the only thing, I've added it to the domain, I've set the network properties, and I've also set the time zone, so that's pretty much the only thing I've done on here. So if we get to the Metro interface, usually you can right click in the bottom of the screen and this All Apps menu will come up. And I found sometimes PowerShell shows up here and sometimes it does not. So I'm going to show you how to launch it even if it does not show up here. So what I've heard from a lot of people, because I'll generally ask this at conferences that I do this presentation at, they'll say do a Windows R. So that brings up a run command and type in PowerShell. So we're going to do that and we're going to set the font on this because I want you to be able to see it. And like I said, nothing's been configured on this machine. I have certain settings that I always use for this. So everyone should now be able to see this. And we're gonna fast forward ahead because you'll notice that the title bar does not show administrator. And what I'm doing here is if I do stop service bits, generates an error message. And this is exactly what I was telling you about. It can't ask for permissions to participate in user access control. So we're going to go ahead and close this because you do need to run PowerShell as administrator. It's one of the main issues I hear of new users running into. So if you will press Windows Q as in question, that brings up the search menu. And if you can spell properly, you can find Windows PowerShell, and if you want the ISC, you can find the ISC. But we want PowerShell. So what we're going to do, we're going to right click on this, which brings up a menu bar at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to pin it to the taskbar. So now we'll go back to our desktop, and you'll notice we have a PowerShell shortcut at the bottom. what I do is hold down Shift, right click and select Properties. I believe under Advanced, and it is under Advanced, I select this Run as Administrator checkmark. So, and I want you to also know that I'm logged into this machine as a standard user. I'm a non-administrator. So when we run this, we are going to get prompted with UAC to say, hey, provide admin credentials. Now, I found most IT people will be logged into their machine as a local admin, but as a domain user. So if that's the case, you will not receive this prompt because you're already an administrator on the box. This is a very generic domain, so we'll just use the administrator account. And you'll notice it did not save the font that I set because this is actually running out of a different profile. So we will adjust our settings again. Okay, so now we're really ready to get started. And just to show you that it does make a difference, and I stop service bits. And you'll notice stop service bits didn't return anything, but it didn't return an error, and it did work, and we'll come back to this. So we're just going to clear the screen. So I was showing you the versions of PowerShell, version 1, 2, 3. So how do you know what you have installed? Maybe you've got 1 to 7, you're not really sure what you have installed. So there's a built-in variable called PS version table, and variables, the $sign is not really part of the variable name, but it designates that this is a variable. You'll notice the first item in the list is PS version, it's version 3.0. The other way to find this, and if you type this in, if you type in PS version table, which was the previous command, and it does not return anything and you know you're in PowerShell, that means you have version 1.0 and you need to upgrade. So you can also run get host. You'll notice the second thing in the list on this one is version 3.0. So once again, just two different ways to accomplish the same task to determine what version of PowerShell you have. And I was talking about the integrated scripting environment, or the ISE, earlier. If you're in PowerShell and you want to launch the ISE, you can simply type in ISE and that will launch the PowerShell ISE. And one of the benefits if you're presenting is there's a zoom tool here, or zoom bar, so you can simply zoom in instead of having to adjust the fonts the way we did in the console. So this is where you would create a script to save for later use. And this is a very good tool, but it does lack some what I consider to be basic functionality. And if you're looking for a better tool, the Sapien PowerShell Studio 2012 is a much better tool. But for a free tool, this is not a bad tool, and it is much better than the ISE in version 2. If you're stuck with the ISE in version 2, I would highly recommend downloading at least the 45-day eval of the Sapien PowerShell Studio 2012. And ISE, what we just typed in, is actually an alias, and we're going to be covering aliases in a few minutes because I want you to be aware of what those are. But the first command, and if you leave here with one command, get help. So when I type that in, you'll notice update help has never been run on this computer. And make sure you see this, because you get this one time and one time only. And I'm actually going to say no. So if I say no, we're going to run the same command again. And you'll notice I didn't get the prompt that time. It will try to update your help once per day unless you use a forced parameter. And we will be covering parameters so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So this machine may or may not have internet access because it is a VM in a restricted environment on my machine. I actually downloaded the help earlier, but I want to show you if I started running, say, get help on get command, you'll notice get help cannot find the help files for this commandlet on this computer. It's only displaying partial help, and it tells you to run the update help command, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now earlier what I did, there's another command that goes along with update help called save help, and I ran this command like earlier and told it a path on a server that's running in this virtual environment. So update help, and if I could spell, that's the great thing about tabbed expansion. Instead of me typing it out wrong and hitting enter, you can type out part of the command and you can press tab, and if the tabbed expansion does not work, that means you typed something wrong. So it keeps you, if you're in a presentation, from having a lot of red errors on the screen. So DC02, and we're going to go to the C $ share, which under the current credentials we're running as, we do not have access to. And I saved it in a folder called PS Update. We are going to use the force parameter, and we're using the credential parameter since I need to specify alternate credentials. Now I'll use parentheses here and specify the get credential commandlet inside those parentheses. And what that does is, just like in math, it's going to run get credential first when I press enter. I'm going to enter my credentials, and then it's going to run the command with those credentials. So if you have something that you want to run first, then put it in parentheses. So hopefully this will work the first go round. And we will save these credentials into a variable at some point, because we're going to be using them over and over. You'll notice the help is updating, and this would have taken much longer even across the internet, but it's on the share is on another VM on the same laptop that I'm using. So we're just going to arrow up and run get help, get command again. You'll notice we didn't get those errors this time, but you'll also notice that we've got several pages of information, or at least a page or two. So unless you really just like typing, because you could type, I actually want to run get help. Name is the parameter, so get help on get command, which is what we previously ran, because name is a positional parameter, and I want to show you how you know that it's a positional parameter. And get command is the value that we're specifying for that parameter. So I believe this is how you do it. You could pipe it to more, and so you get a page at a time. And I could hit the space bar and get another page. Well, that's a fairly long command. So help is a function that actually automatically pipes get help to more. So we can run this command and receive exactly the same thing. Now one thing to note is more does not work in the ISC. Now that does not mean that help does not work, but you have a scroll bar in the ISC. So if I typed in help get command, you'll notice you have a scroll bar. So you're able to scroll. Okay, I've got some notes here. I'm just making sure that I'm on track. There are certain things I want to make sure I cover for anyone who is new to PowerShell. we'll go ahead and clear the screen, and we'll run help, which is the function that pipes the get help commandlet to more automatically. And we want to specify the name of a commandlet that we want help for. And we'll go ahead and specify get help. And I can still use tabbed expansion even for that value. And I'm going to press the spacebar one time and then do a Control C. Because what I want you to see is each block, there's 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 6 different blocks of options for this command. And these are called parameter sets. And there is some difference between every one of these parameter sets. You'll see that name exists in every single one of these parameter sets. So we could use name with any of these parameter sets. But the first one is the full parameter set. And the second one is the detailed parameter set. So you can't use and full only exist in this first parameter set and in none of the others. Detailed only exists in this second parameter set and none of the others. And so on. Now the show window is a new parameter set, and the show window is a parameter, but this parameter set is new to PowerShell version 3. And this is actually one of my favorite parameters. It's what I use now when I want help on a command. And I'm going to demonstrate that. So if we go back to the previous command and we specify show and we can just press tab, it'll finish it for us. It will launch a window. And what we can do if we have multiple monitors, and I do, you can pull this over to another monitor and then you can go back to we're working in the PowerShell console. So you can be looking at this on one screen and be working in the console on the other. Now I used to use the online parameter when it wasn't possible to update the local help. And if you have PowerShell version 2, that's the scenario you're in. So we'll go ahead and close the show window because I know the font is fairly small on this, so it may be difficult for you guys to read. What I want to do is scroll back up to these parameter sets. And you'll see most people typing help get command, or help get service, or help get process. Now you can type in -examples behind that and see examples only. The full parameter is also another excellent parameter to use because it will show you all the details. It will show you everything. I mean, anything you get in any of these parameter sets, it will show you except for the show window. And what I wanted to show you with the name, it is a positional parameter. And I want you to take this for what it's worth. All the punctuation means something, and what I really mean by that is these square brackets. So since name is inside square brackets, that means it's optional, meaning that it's a positional parameter. If you're not going to say -name and just put the name, you have to put it in the first position. You can't put the category and then put the name, because the only way it knows that what that value is for is to be in the first position. And I'm going to show you a slightly easier way, especially for a newcomer to PowerShell, to find this information. Now the parameter name and string, which is the type of value that it accepts, is also enclosed completely by square brackets. And that means the entire thing is optional. So you don't even have to give it a name if you don't want to. And we are going to be looking at some other commandlets. You'll notice the second parameter here, which is category. The entire thing is enclosed in square brackets. That means it's optional. But you'll notice that category is not enclosed in square brackets. That means that if you're going to specify a category, you have to use the parameter name of category. You'll notice with the name, it only accepts a string. That means it accepts one value. You'll notice with the category, it has square brackets after the string. This is the only time that the square brackets do not mean that something's optional. With the square brackets behind string, what that means is it can take an array of strings or more than one string, more than one value. Okay. So the other way to find this out is there is a parameter for get help. And I know that sounds redundant, but you'll understand in a second. So if we say help, and we can also use the function, so if you really get lost in PowerShell, just remember help, help. So you can do help on get help by specifying help, help. So we want the name parameter. So the commandlet we're running is get help, which we specified a function for that. We're using a positional parameter of name, and we are getting help on get help, and then we are specifying we want information on the name parameter. So the only thing it returned was information on name. It'll give you very detailed information. It will tell you, is it required? No, it's not. So if you don't remember what all those square brackets are for, that's okay. It'll tell you right here in plain English. It's positional. It has to be in position 1. It has no default value. And the accept pipeline input, while this is very important for a beginner, don't worry so much about that. That'll come with time. The accept wildcard characters, true. So that means I can use wildcard characters. Okay. So we've covered the different parameter sets of get help, and show window is what I would highly recommend if you have PowerShell version 3. If you don't, I would recommend the online or the full. And we'll up arrow, which gives me the previous command, and I'll show you full. And it's still at a page at a time, so if I keep hitting the space bar to get the next page, it will eventually get to name, which is the one we're currently on. So you can see the same information inside full, but it gives you everything. And if you keep going all the way to the bottom, it will even give you the examples. So the full parameter and full, I'll show you one more thing. Full is actually, it's considered to be a switch parameter because it does not require a value after the parameter name. And if you ever have a super long command typed out, you don't have to hit backspace and get rid of the command, just hit escape. So if you've got 3 or 4 lines of a command typed out, and it depends on if you hit space, then you're actually inside of a command, so that's a little bit different. But if you've got something typed out, you can just hit escape and it'll get rid of the entire command. So there's a lot of anything that worked in DOS, any of the hotkeys or anything, from what I've found, they work in PowerShell. So what I'll do now, I want to show you that you can use help to find commands, which is, like I said, it's not what I use help for, but if I do help on IC, which is what we ran earlier, you'll notice that help does not find commandlets. It finds help topics, but it's almost a one-to-one to a help topic to a commandlet, so it appears that it's searching for commandlets when it's really not. But you'll notice ISE is at the top of the list, and it is an alias. And under the synopsis column, you've got PowerShell ISE.exe. So that's actually what it runs when you type in ISE. So you would think that if I said alias, that it would return the same sort of results that it did with ISE, but it does not. And I'll show you. So what it did, there is a help topic that meets alias exactly. So that's why when it, so if I say, if I put an asterisk in front of alias, that's probably what you were expecting with the previous command. But under name, you'll notice that the last item in the list is alias. So if it finds something, if you said help, get service, then it's going to display the help for get service. And that's exactly what it did with this alias one. It found, it said, hey, there's a match, so let me show him how to use this alias provider. And I'm going to go ahead, I want you to know what aliases are. And this is actually a very good commandlet to learn PowerShell because it only has two really simple parameter sets. And it's very easy to see that that name is a positional parameter and definition is not. And the reason I want you to know about getAlias is you're going to go out to somebody's blog and they're going to use these cryptic commands and you're going to say, man, what are they doing? So getAlias, you'll also notice that that name accepts an array of strings. So I could say question mark, and that's one of the common ones you'll see on blogs, because I'm even some of my older blogs, if you look at them before I learn better, you'll notice that that I use that. Somebody had retweeted an old blog of mine a few days ago, and it's like, oh, I wouldn't do it that way anymore. But so anyway, you'll see that that the question mark is where object. It's an alias for where object. And you can do more than one since it accepts an array of strings. You could say dir, cls, and so on. So you can get all those in one command. So that way you don't have to keep running separate commands. But what if the other parameter set is for definition? What if I know the commandlet and I want to know what aliases exist for that? And does definition accept an array of strings? And it does. So I know I can put more than one value, but even with that parameter. So getAlias. So I know what this clear host, and I can use, well, I thought I could use tabbed expansion, and see, tabbed expansion is not working, so that's telling me I did something wrong. So if I put clear host, guess what? It's going to give me what looks like an error message, but it's just going to say, hey, we didn't find any aliases. So yeah, it cannot find a matching alias because it's looking for the alias side and not what are the aliases for the commandlet. And what keyed me into that was an issue is tabbed expansion didn't work. So if I say definition, which is definition is a parameter, and I give it a value of clear host, and I was able to press tab and it resolved the name of that commandlet. And then maybe I won't get child item. So now I can see that clear is an alias to clear host, CLS is another alias for clear host, and DR and GCI and LS are all aliases for get child item. And like I said, I want you to be aware of how to look up aliases. So when you go to somebody's blog and they've not used what I consider to be best practices for blogging on PowerShell, and they use these cryptic So if you do they used a question mark or they used a percent symbol. And question mark, of course, is where object, as we've already discussed, and percent sign is for each object. We'll go ahead and clear our screen again. So the command I like to use to find commandlets is get command. So of course, if we want to know how to use get command, we would say help on get command. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control C. It only has 2 parameter sets, but it does have many parameters. And one of the ones I do want you to write down this get help and then get command are 2 of the main things I want you to get out of this meeting tonight. There is a new parameter here, at least one new parameter. Parameter name is new with PowerShell version 3, and we will cover that. This is information you could previously get from PowerShell version 2, but it was a little more difficult to get to, and now it's simplified with PowerShell version 3. And that's kind of what I found with version 3, is it's not that you couldn't do the same thing in version 2, but it was more difficult to accomplish the same task in version 2. But if you only have version 2 in your environment, there's no reason at all to wait to version 3. If you can't load it because of the age of the operating system or because of management or security reasons, then you need to learn PowerShell version 2 and use what you have, because you'll be able to pick up the differences from version 2 to 3 much easier than waiting another year or two to get version 3 in your environment. Because I started learning with version 2, and I still have version 2 on many of the machines that I have. Okay, back to the get command commandlet. And there is an alias for this, but I'm not going to show you the alias, because if you're a new person to PowerShell, you should start out typing out the commandlets and the parameters and that sort of stuff. And once you get familiar with how this works, then you can start using the shortcuts. So if I do get command, and I want to find everything that starts with service, and that tabbed expansion there did not work the way I wanted it to. So get command star service, and you'll notice that's the name. So it's what I just typed in, name is a positional parameter again for this commandlet. So you'll see the results are the same for those 2 commands. Okay, well maybe I want something a little more advanced than that. Maybe I want get command, and I want to find everything that starts with get, deals with DNS, and then a wildcard would be anything after it. So you can see, and I want you to take note of the last 2 results that were returned, and that's because we put a wildcard between get and DNS. So DNS can be in the noun portion of the command anywhere. And there's some additional parameters with get command that you don't have to necessarily use wildcards. So to find the same thing, you could say get command, you could say verb, because verb-noun, singular verb-noun, unless the commandlets are poorly written commandlets, because there are some out there that don't meet this. So verb is get, noun, and you wouldn't need to use the wildcards here. So otherwise, if you didn't use the wildcards, it would be looking for an exact match on noun, I believe, and see it did not find anything. So there are parameters that can be used. Now what I was telling you earlier, let's go back and run a help on get command one more time. And what I want to show you is command type, because this will return all aliases, all functions, all commandlets. So you notice here you've got noun, and of course these are in alphabetical order. You've got verb, but in the other parameter set, well, you've got total count. Let's just use total count. Command type. Command type is the one I was actually looking for. You'll notice command type does not exist in the first parameter set. So that means I can't use noun and I can use noun and verb together, but I can't use either one of those with command type. And sometimes the tabbed expansion will let you do things. So let's do get command dash verb of get dash, and see, tabbed expansion allowed me to put command type in. So we're going to do commandlet. And I could be wrong, maybe it's part of both of them, but I've got money that says this is going to generate an error because those are in mutually exclusive parameter sets. Yep, and you'll notice the error, parameter set cannot be resolved using the specified name parameters. So even though tabbed expansion didn't protect me in this scenario. So if I took the command type off, it will give me every command that starts with get that's on this machine. And if I took the, and as I was saying, the DOS commands, I can hold down Control and do a left arrow and go a word at a time instead of a character at a time. So it's much faster to maneuver at the command prompt. So this is every commandlet on the machine. And I try not to return that much information because I do know there's some lag over the Microsoft link. Let's see. Oh, the parameter name. That's the new one with PowerShell version 3. So if I do get command, and I want to know every command that has a computer name parameter. There it is. That is actually a really cool feature, and you could get that. So let's do get command. And let's do test ws man, and this is just the next to the last. It's shorter than the last one, so that's why I picked it. So you'll notice I've only got 3 properties that are returned by default, and that is actually only a fraction of the information that PowerShell has about this commandlet. And this is as good a time as any to jump into get member. Get member is the other command that you need to write down. So you've got get help, you've got get command, and you've got get member. And if you remember those commandlets, and if you forget everything else, just run get help on itself and the other 2. And then once you know how to use those 3, then for the most part you can figure everything else out for yourself. You've got your own Google inside of PowerShell. Okay, so if I run this, it's going to show me all the methods and properties that exist in addition to the type of object this produces. And most people, when they tell you the type of object, they'll only tell you the last part after the last decimal, or the last period. So it's commandlet info. And what this is actually, this is not the methods and properties for test ws man. What this is the methods and properties for get command. So regardless of the commandlet name here, it should return exactly the same thing. So what I want to show you is, if you want data with this, you can pipe this to format list and specify property star. And property in this scenario is a positional parameter, so you'll see it left out most of the time. So this is all the information that can be returned. And this is actually not all the information, because there is a force parameter, because sometimes there's additional data, and in my opinion it's data that they're really hiding to protect you from yourself. So there is parameters. So there is a collection here that has the parameters in it. And this is definitely more advanced than it can still be considered beginner, but it's not a really new beginner. And you saw how easy the parameter name parameter was to specify. So in order to dig that information out, let's try this. So select object, which I'll typically abbreviate select because everything is an object in PowerShell. So select parameters, and that's not going to return anything worth using, I can tell you right now, because what we need to do is expand that. Expand property parameters. So you'll notice in the key there is a computer name parameter for that commandlet. So you can see it's much more difficult to get that, and it's definitely more difficult to get a list of commandlets, an entire list of commandlets on my machine that has that computer name parameter. So we'll just go ahead and clear the screen. And the only reason I showed you that is just to show you how much easier that PowerShell 3 makes your life. So do we have any questions so far? Is anybody still there?
Yeah, we're here, Mike.
I'm just picking with y'all. Okay, so
Here.
we've been going for about an hour here, so I'm gonna and I've got plenty of information, and I know for you advanced guys this is probably fairly boring information. So one misconception is that when you're running Git commandlets that they're read-only, that you can't make changes to the system. I hear that a lot from beginners, and let's clear up that misconception. So I want a commandlet that works with services. So I would run git command, and the verb I'm looking for is get, and the noun is service. So get service. And then to find out how to use get service, I would run help on get service. And I would normally specify the show window. And I tell you what, there's another command that's new to PowerShell version 3 that'll make your life even easier. So we'll just do a show command. So you do show command and you get this little window. So we want to run get service. So there it is, get service. So we double click on it. You can run it against a computer. We want bits is the name of the service we want. You can say give me the required services. You can specify the display name. You can do it all in the GUI. So all those guys that say, hey, I can't learn PowerShell because I'm a GUI guy, then all you need to do is run show command, because there's your GUI to do PowerShell. So you click run here, bam, it put the command in there. I didn't even have to type it. So get service name bits. So you'll notice it stopped because we stopped it earlier. And you can press F7 to pull up a history of your commands, and we've typed in 49 commands. So I can press home and get to the very first one. So one of the first commandlets we ran, and it actually, we may have, no, there it is, stop service bits, very first one. So we're going to run that. You notice it didn't return anything. So earlier or just a few minutes ago, we were piping things to get member. And in order to pipe commandlets to get member, it has to return an object. And stop service by default does not return an object, so this will generate an error, and it does. See, no object has been specified. So if you were going to run this, you would need to use the pass-through parameter, and then you could see the properties and the methods. So it's just something I just thought about. So anyway, we'll do up arrow a couple times. We've got get service name bits. We actually want to do a get member on that. And that'll return more than a screen full of stuff on this shorter screen. So what I actually want is a member type of methods. And you will notice that there is a stop and a start method. The third and fourth one from the bottom. So what I can do, the service is stopped. So what I can do to call that method is you place your commandlet inside parentheses. And to do that, I pressed home to get back to the home and then end to get back to the end. You specify a period or a dot or decimal, whatever you want to call it, and start. And since it's a method, you would put parentheses at the end. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to show you that don't think just because you're running a get command that you can't make changes to the system. Because now if I run get service name bits, it's running. We just started a service with a get commandlet. Now the way that PowerShell, it's easier to do this with the commandlets. And the pipeline input that we discussed earlier, and I said, hey, don't worry about that right now. You can get fairly advanced with that. But if you have a commandlet get service, then you're able to pipe the output from that commandlet to stop service, start service, and that's kind of the easiest way to get started with pipeline input. So I know that when I run this, it only returns one service. So I can pipe that to stop service, and it won't return any objects. And I can do this, and even though it's already stopped, I can still use the pass-through parameter, and it'll basically just check the status of it because it is already stopped. So let's go ahead and start that so you can see what it would do. So if you're doing something that's making system changes, the other option is what if. And trust me, what if will be it will save your job. Because when you're doing something on production servers, you want to run what if. It'll tell you exactly what it's going to do. And any commandlet that supports what if supports confirm. So, and it gives you the prompt, are you sure you want to do this? And if you're stopping all the services on the machine, you can say yes to each single one instead of yes to all. So that way, kind of like in SQL, when you're doing a delete and you forget to put a where statement in and you delete everything in the table, when you forget to put your name bits and you stop every service on the server until it blue screens and reboots, then like I said, it'll save your job. We're going to jump over to get process real quick. So we need Notepad running, and we need several of them. So we'll do 1 to 10. We'll pipe that for each object, and we'll start 10 notepads, and that should work. So there you go. We got 10 notepads. So now, if we want to run help on get process. I want to show you something that newcomers to PowerShell also get caught up on. So we'll do a Control C because the primary thing I want to see you is I want you to see is the parameter sets. So you'll notice you've got a name parameter set, you've got an ID parameter set, and I believe the third one is just an input object, so it's pipeline input. So a lot of people get caught up on, I really want to filter by name and by ID. And since those are in mutually exclusive parameter sets, they think they can't do that because it would generate the error like what we saw earlier. But you have to think outside the box. You actually can do that, and I'll show you. So if we run get process, and the first one we wanted is name, but it is a positional parameter, so we don't have to specify that. Name is notepad, so we see our 10 notepads running there. Okay, so if I put ID in here and I did 1136, of course it's going to generate an error. You don't have to do it that way. You always want to try to filter before the first pipeline, but when it's not possible, filter after. So where ID is 11, and that's not the best example because you could certainly just filter on ID, but maybe you want to say where the ID is greater than 3000. So there's the 4 that are greater than 3000. So we filtered on name to start with, which instead of running get process and an alias to get process is PS. This is the shortest alias for that commandlet. So you see there was an awful lot of processes running. So we did a lot of our filtering before the first pipeline because we filtered down to Notepad, and then we did the remaining of the filtering after the pipeline. Now this is PowerShell version 3 syntax, and I'm going to show you the syntax for PowerShell version 2. So where, and the commandlet name is actually where object, and I sort object, where object, select. I abbreviate all those with the first part of that commandlet name, but I don't use, if I'm working interactively at the console like we're doing tonight, I will use the question mark. But if I'm trying to teach somebody something, I do not use those, or if I'm going to save a script, then I don't use those cryptic aliases, and I don't use them on my blog. So where, and don't try to remember the syntax in the English language because you will never remember it. So script block, put your script block in. Don't say curly braces. Don't worry about what it is in English. Current object. You want a portion of the current object. So that's why sometimes I call this a decimal. And ID is what we want. So that's actually the property that we're getting. It's not really a portion of the object, but it's the property. So greater than, and of course you have greater than or equal to, and all these are documented. You can find these. This is where you could use Google, but they're all documented in the help as well, so I'd prefer to use the help. So you have equal, but we want greater than, which is GT. And we did 3000 before. So, and this should run, and it does run, and it returns the same output. Now, the problem with the version 3 syntax is if you try to put an AND in here and do a compound where statement. So what other columns do we have? And this is actually CPUs. This is not... Mike. Sure.
Yeah, that's using the PS item.
If you're using PowerShell version 3, there's no reason not to use it. But if you want to make your scripts backwards compatible, that would be the only reason that you wouldn't want to use it. But I do use that, and that is a new. Let's just show that real quick. So PS item, I believe that this is how you do it. Yep. So it makes it a little bit clearer. If I go here, so to show what the $_ or the current object is, it's going to return the same output, but I can pipe this to for each, and then I can say current object. It'll output exactly the same thing. Because what happens is it's my understanding that the output from get process is sent through the pipeline one object at a time, and then it's piped to for each, and then by putting the current object variable in the script block, that makes it output each object one at a time. But what you see on the screen, it appears you're getting all the objects at a time, but you're not actually getting all objects at a time. And when you're using sort object or using a format table auto, if you have a lot of results, you'll see that, because if you use a format table and don't use the auto size, then you'll see the progress, you'll see it scrolling down your screen. But when you use the auto size, it's got all those objects have to be in memory for it to figure out how wide to make the column, and also for sorting. So let's get back on topic real quick. So the version 3 syntax, if I do an and I believe the CPU column is the property is going to be called CPU. So we're going to do that. And CPU greater than .05. Of course it's going to error out, because when you're using a compound where statement, you have to use the older syntax. Okay. And you'll notice it, I didn't put I didn't close the script block. So there's our output of that command. Now what I see a lot of people doing, and don't do this, they don't know how to write the compound where statement. So what they'll do, they'll pipe it to where something, and then they'll pipe it to where something again, and they'll get the same output, but that's a poor practice. So if you the PowerShell scripting games is very good for learning how to do this stuff, and you'll get like a 1 or 2 out of 5 maybe if you do that in the scripting games. Okay, let's see, any other questions? And anything you want to know is, if you do a help about, these are all the help topics in PowerShell. If you want to know about the greater than and all that sort of stuff, if you ran help, and I see one of them is about comparison operators, and I'm guessing here. So yeah, you can see equal, not equal to, greater than or equal to, like, not like, match. And it'll go through in detail and tell you exactly how to use all of these comparison operators. So everything you ever wanted to know about PowerShell is in the PowerShell help. And it looks like we've got about, I was planning on about an hour and a half for this meeting. So I want to finish up my slide deck, and then we'll jump back in PowerShell to kind of be off the grid and cover anything else that anybody else has. And of course, as you can see, I don't know how to use PowerPoint. I'm not a PowerPoint person. I should have done start from where I left off, but that's okay. Okay, so once again, our sponsors. And Sapient Technologies is one of the ones I'm very familiar with, and O'Reilly, of course, and Pluralsight. And of course, this is a Florida PowerShell user group meeting, and the Florida PowerShell user group meetings are held on the 3rd Tuesday of each month. And I've got a slide with the URL for, well, it's on that slide also. And as Max said earlier, this is premium online training, and I think we've got some giveaways that I'm going to turn it back over to Max here in a minute for the giveaways. So the giveaways tonight, Pluralsight, I think he said it was a 1-month subscription to Pluralsight. We've got a 1 full discount coupon for Campus MVP. We've got a Sapien Technology ebook. I don't know if that, I know he said that was the PowerShell version 2, but if that, I'm not sure if you get to choose or if that's a specific book, but Jeff Hicks has
specific book.
Jeff Hicks has a Active Directory PowerShell version 2 that's published by Sapien, and I know that's an excellent book. Let's see, Campus MVP user group benefits. Okay, here's the contact information. My blog is mikefrobbins.com or Mr. PowerShell. Twitter, you can find me at Mike F. Robbins. Pretty much anywhere out there, I go sign up for Mike F. Robbins because I also believe in doing personal branding. I want to have the same brand everywhere. And that's one of the reasons we chose to go with the mspsug.com for the Mississippi PowerShell user group. Even though we were able to get the misspowershell.com domain name, we weren't able to get that Twitter handle. So we wanted our Twitter handle to match our domain name. And then under other resources there's the Florida PowerShell user group URL for their website. And our meeting, the Mississippi PowerShell user group meeting, was last week. So ours is on the second Tuesday of every month. And then the Florida one is on the 3rd. So 2 excellent user groups and great free resources. And we have somebody different speaking every month. I know Max does for the Florida PowerShell user group, and we do also for the Mississippi one. So that's the last slide I have, so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Max at this point.
Hey, Mike, thank you very much. Great presentation. Appreciate it.